Hello and welcome to the At Sea Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and I'm also my own guest. We've made some changes here at the podcast after years of focusing on external content, whether that was interviews with people or even my own books. We're coming to you kind of more direct that we're spending time on this podcast answering the questions that you have, or addressing the questions you have about the way you're living, about art and religion and leadership. For the last number of years, I've been doing kind of a Q&R, Q&A. We can talk about that at some point. This Q&R, Q&A thing at Instagram, and like an Ask Me Anything. I usually do it on Tuesdays. And it's been an incredibly life-giving process and practice for me. And it made sense that as we came to the end of a season with the podcast, in which we'd spent a bunch of time on a book that I had released, digging into the things behind the book, hoping that it landed somewhere in your life and was helpful to you, that we actually married these two things. That this, what I felt like was maybe the most helpful thing I was doing in public, let's parlay that into more. And so what I'm going to do today, which is what I'll be doing going forward, is I'm going to be pulling some of the questions that I got from Instagram and going a little bit deeper into the answers for each one of those. We will maybe look for other ways to do for you to submit questions, so that if you're not an Instagram person, or if you used to be and don't want to be anymore, that social media is not the only place to get a question here. But for the time being, this is how the questions are getting to me, is through this Tuesday Q&R, Q&A thing I'm doing. I will also say that, this behavior, this practice, has become my favorite part of any of the public work that I do. And that was reinforced, I think it was yesterday. I was at a corporate training, was asked to speak at this corporate training. And without question, my favorite part of the entire morning is I told a couple stories, and then spent time, asked them to chew it. Like, what are these stories stirring in you? And then they spent time at their tables talking about, this is what this stirred in me. The group conversation that happened afterwards was the most fruitful and life-giving time, not just for me, but also for them. And that happens for a couple reasons. One, I can tell you the same story just out of the blue, and it sort of floats at 10 or 12,000 feet in your life, and you can look at it from a distance and decide maybe like that has something to do with you. But if you ask me a question that has to do with your life, it's like opening a door. You're saying, hey, what do you have to say about this? And if the story I offer is in direct response to a question you have, it tends to land a little bit more deeply. I found that with me. And I think this is probably true of you as well. So I'm trying to galvanize and deepen this relationship a little bit more, to go deeper with the people who are already paying attention, rather than chase new numbers, what have you. I set that morning yesterday, within the corporate training morning, up with the same thing that I set this new season of the podcast up with, which is this story that a number of years ago, well, this person's still a friend of mine, but a friend and mentor named Ken Hefner, who ran a program at a college, and was a show promoter. And he would get in front of audiences before shows and say, you're expecting this artist to have brought their best to the table, and you got a ticket. And I'm expecting the same of you as an audience. And that what makes a show magical, what really, like, where the rubber really meets the road with regards to art and connection, is when the audience, the people who are there paying attention, actually offer their full attention. I would like to do as much of that with the rest of my life as I possibly can, not just in terms of Q&A, Q&R, but I want to forge more and deeper of a connection with you as I continue to make work. I want to know what's going on with you. I want to speak more directly with you about your life. That's the stuff that actually fires me up. So let's get to this week's questions, the things from Instagram. And like I said, normally, like the way I pose this at Instagram is I'll say, ask me anything, art, religion, and leadership. We had some really interesting questions to come from religious perspective this time. And I've put a couple of them together to be one. But the first one had to do with this person had read the book Title Pending, which is about rest work rhythms in life. And they wrote and they said, is there really a correlation between physical movement and becoming unstuck emotionally and mentally? Again, is there really a correlation between physical movement and becoming unstuck emotionally and mentally? Um, Absolutely there is, without question. In fact, I'm going to push beyond just saying absolutely. I'm going to suggest that for a lot of people who work in business, who work in the arts, I mean, most of our jobs and the way we do our jobs are very like head oriented. I'm thinking about a project. I'm in conversations with people. We're planning. We're in meetings. Like it's all happening like neck up. It's stuff that's in my head. What I think we imagine some I've got so much we imagine that we've got so much stuff going on in my head that it's all clogged and hazy. What I think happens at least as often as this, I actually experience most of my life through like sensory interaction. And because if I'm in my head all day, I'm ignoring what's going on with my body. And so I think this is what's actually happening. I think there's plenty of room in your head, and I don't think we're actually altogether that overwhelmed most of the time. I think most of the time, like we're not paying attention to our sensory relationship with the world. And so that fogginess that I'm experiencing is actually happening in my whole person, and I'm carrying stress or I'm carrying tension or I might even be carrying like a question or some sort of energy like in my body, but I'm I'm analyzing that and I'm interpreting that with my head. So it sounds and feels like noise. What I don't suggest is I don't suggest, hey, go get in the gym or go take a run or go get a swim or go take a walk and just get that stuff out of your body so you can get back in your head. What I actually think happens is when we get in our bodies and we take the run, we go to the gym, like goodness, truth, and beauty get unlocked in our whole person. And then we get to bring more of us back to the table with the question we're on or the project we're on. So, is there a correlation between physical movement and becoming unstuck emotionally and mentally? I want to reframe the question. I think there's a correlation between I think the question ends up being, am I offering my whole person? And getting in my body and training my body to engage with the world around me consciously actually means that like I don't need to just get unstuck emotionally and mentally. I want to become whole so that I'm more fully present. So I'm not pushing back on the question because I think it's an incomplete question per se, but I do think it opens the door to a better question, which is, am I bringing my whole person to the table? Um, that's that's where I'm coming from with this. In fact, there's a story I tell in the book, in the very first prayer book that I did with Scott Erickson. He and I are actually doing a third prayer book right now, in which this young man comes to a priest and says, "Hey, there's something wrong with my spiritual life." The priest says, "What's going on?" He says, "Yeah, normally I get to the end of the day and I lay on my bed and I contemplate my day, and I normally I've got some peace, and I think about my sort of practice of examine that like I let the goodness of the day catch up with me, and then I think about tomorrow and." But recently, as I lay down and I start thinking about my day, like I feel terrible. So something's wrong with my spiritual life. And the priest says, so it's every night? He says, every night. He says, when you lay down? He goes, yeah, I want to lay down. He goes, what's it feel like? He says, yeah, that's like a pressure. It's like, it used to be like, I would lay there and I would feel like free. And now I lay there and I feel like this pressure, this burning. He's like, that story in the scriptures where Jesus is walking with the disciples and they say there was a burning in our hearts. And then the priest says, yeah, I know the story. He goes, yeah, it's like that. And the priest slides out of his chair, and this guy thinks that the priest is going to kneel down and pray for him. But instead, he slides out of his chair, reaches into his satchel, pulls out an antacid, and hands it to the young man and says, son, you have heartburn. And I tell that story not as like, not to present this like this kind of counterbalance to spirituality, but instead that I would suggest that thinking spiritually about our lives means considering our whole lives as a matter of importance. We tend to segment things out, our emotional and mental lives, our spiritual lives, and our physical lives. I think we have to at times address those aspects of our lives separately, but the goal is not to get one aspect of my life clear. When I have an issue spiritually, I'm going to guarantee you that there's a mental and emotional and social component to that. And if I'm having issues interrelationally, I'm going to guarantee you there's a spiritual and emotional and maybe even vocational aspect of that. It is all one big entanglement. Beautiful entanglement. One of the places we most consistently miss that entanglement is in our bodies. Long answer to a really great question. Second question that I really, really loved, advice on self-forgiveness without sacrificing accountability. So this is a bit of a leadership question. So the question is advice on self-forgiveness. This person has crossed a line, they've dropped the ball, and they want to forgive themselves, but they don't want to sacrifice accountability. I'm going to start here with the answer I gave them, that part of self-forgiveness actually is accountability. In order to actually feel forgiveness and experience forgiveness and forgive myself, I have to own the thing that I did. That for two reasons. One, I like obviously I can't ask for forgiveness for something if I'm not naming it. I've got to be specific. What did I like? What did I do? What did I do, and how bad was it? And to get to forgiveness, I have to know what it is I'm looking for forgiveness for. And in that process, here's the second and more important thing. Most of the time, our mistakes, the balls we drop, the plates hit the ground and break, it's a smaller deal than we think that it is. It can feel like everything. It can feel like when you've dropped the ball, it's absolutely everything. This is the worst thing, maybe even the only thing you can think about. If I can name a thing, and I say this about all kinds of stuff, if I can name a thing, I recognize it in the context of my whole life. If I can name it, I have some power over it. So accountability, recognizing my wrongdoing and knowing that I've got to make some recompense with some people allows me to make it a little bit of it. Like I get to name it. I've got some power over it. Also, I have some stuff to do. I have a task. If I need to go to someone and say, hey, here's what I know I cost you. This is the best I can do to make up for that. I now can make it a project. It's an action item, and I can get my hands on it. All of this is part of that forgiveness piece. Specifically with regards to self-forgiveness, here's why that's important. If I over-identify, if I allow my wrongdoings to sort of float around unnamed, and I don't go about taking accountability for the things I do, those things just kind of hover around the back of my head. And what dark energy does in our hearts, minds, souls is it tends to just kind of grow. That if I don't name the thing, I give it permission to take over space. And over the course of time, what I would have initially felt guilty about, I end up feeling shame for. Guilt, and we know this, guilt is about saying, I have done a wrong thing. Shame is saying, I am someone who does wrong things. If I can name and take accountability for the wrongdoings in my life, I avoid the shame part. The shame part is where forgiveness no longer has access. Like forgiveness is about saying you are more than your mistakes. Shame is about saying like you are a person who simply makes mistakes and that's who you are. So taking accountability for our wrongdoings is a massive aspect of self-forgiveness so that I can see how small the thing actually is in the context of my life and give myself things to do about it. I like this question. It comes up in a bunch of different ways. So I'm gonna give you the one question and the question that followed it that was actually very similar to it, and it has to do with life patterns and creativity. The question is how to balance being creative and a mom of littles. I feel torn and failing at both. And then this person says, I have very little motivation to create and keep my ideas, and I keep my ideas in my head. Do you have any thoughts? So again, the first question is how to balance being a creative person and being a mom of littles. I feel torn and that I'm feeling it both. And this other person is saying, I feel very little motivation to create and I keep my ideas in my head. Do you have any thoughts? I'll address these separately, but I'm also going to show us, try to show us how they're really deeply married. You might already see these things. With regards to like balance, it's never about balance. There's a book called Sacred Strides. You should probably check out. Uh, Life, movement, progress, achievements, all of these things. Living well and living wholly is never about balance. Balance quite literally is death. And the idea or the hope or efforts towards balance almost always lead us to some degree of feeling, which she says here at the end, torn and like we're failing at both things. What balance says in its weird promise is that you can do all things that you're supposed to do or that you want to do equally, equally and equally well. That if you're doing this, you should also do this. If you care about this, you can also care about this. And what you need to do is find a way to take all the things you care about, all the things you want to do, all the things you should do, and give them equal energy and time and distribute it equal. That's the weird, sick promise of balance. Reality is some things in your life simply will take precedence, period. And you have to give them more time. And this thing that wants time, like you can't give it, it shouldn't give it as much time as this. If you can see where I'm going. And what if I think I'm supposed to give everything equal time, then I feel like I'm failing absolutely everywhere. And I'm not allowed to have the freedom to prioritize a thing for a season, specifically if it's kids. Goodness. Like, may it be so that when we have time, when we are given time to raise human beings, that nothing in our lives puts us in a position to feel like that me being a parent is an obstacle to something else. You should never live there. And the promise, the sick promise of balance is one of the ways that the joy of parenting gets stolen from us. I want to do these other things. I have to find balance in my life. No, you don't. There's a season in your life during which this is the most important thing you're doing. And it's going to take and should take more time, more energy, more creativity. The other side to that, or in that context, this is the question of rhythm and planning. So the overwhelming majority of your time and energy will be spent raising and caring for littles. You're a mom of littles. It's a gorgeous, wonderful job. Role. I don't know what to call that right now. It's a vocation, it's a calling, whatever it is. It's a beautiful thing to be gifted with while you're alive. Insofar as it's going to take so much time and you want to be spending time doing creative projects, this is about calendaring and communication. This is about, one, making a list of things, and we rarely do this. Getting specific. Again, if I can name it, I have some control. Getting specific about what are some of the projects I want to do. And then this is where coaching can be really helpful. Let's pick a project. Let's pick one that we probably think we have time for. And then let's look at the calendar and find reasonable times where we can make, at least initially, minimal sacrifices to get started on that project. And what that might look like is once a month, you have half a day. Once a month, you have a morning or a late night. And we find the time on the calendar. Here's the hard part of the teaching. You do have more time than you think you do. The lie of balance has told you that you don't have time. You feel that guilt that you're failing at things blinds you to possibility, blinds you from the energy, keeps you from the energy you might have to say, like, listen, if I could grab 2 hours every Tuesday, I could probably knock this project out in 6 or 7 months. Let's make that plan. So know that there are seasons in which, like, there are things that you are doing with your time that are gonna just take up the majority of your time and energy. And give yourself to those in greater joy, because you're never going to have balance. So give into the season. And insofar as you've done that, then let's find slivers of time to offer ourselves to other things that are less important. Watch me say it. Less important. If you are raising kids and you have an art project, your art project is less important than raising your kids. So let's find less important time where we can make minimal sacrifices to get started on that project. Which brings me back to this other question. I have very little motivation to create, and I keep my ideas in my head to have thoughts. One of the reasons we keep our ideas in our heads is because of fear. Fear is the mind killer. If you haven't seen Dune, you should see it. Fear is the mind killer. And what fear does is fear pushes everything from our bodies, from our calendars, from our hearts, like up into our heads, and says you need to one, it tells us that we're getting life wrong, and then we start doing math. And then it tells us you need to find a solution for this problem, and these are unsolvable issues. Fear is the thing that pushes everything in our head. I keep my ideas in my head because what I know and what fear knows, what resistance knows, is as soon as I put this out in the world and I ask a coach or ask my family members or talk to my kids about it, I'm going to get free. That's what resistance knows. Resistance knows that if I can keep crap in your head and you don't talk about it, then I'm going to keep you stuck where you are. What actually happens, and it happens, no joke, like almost every single time. You're a mom, you're a dad, you've got a bunch of stuff going on. You keep all these things in your head, and because you're concerned, you're afraid that if you say it out loud, that, well, who knows about that part, but like you keep it all in your head, and you don't want to talk to people around you about it for all numbers of reasons, but then you do, and maybe a coach says, "Hey, let's pick a project. Let's talk to your family about it." You go to your family and sit down with your wife, your husband, your kids. And you're like, "Hey, I really want to put together this book of like poems and pictures." And your family's going to go, "I love that. How do we help you get that done?" When we get stuff out of our head, the risk of removing things from our head and putting them on the table in front of us actually comes with the reward of the world around us that actually loves us saying yes to you. Resistance wants you to think that if you take the stuff out of your head, you're going to get a no and you're going to get rejected. My experience tells me that that is almost never the case. That if we're wise, and this is where coaching helps, if we're wise about the things we choose, and if we're wise about the way we start our planning, what we're going to find in the people in the world around us is a lot of yes about the things we want to do with our time. So those are the questions from this week. Really enjoyed this. If anything from this podcast episode stirs in you, you can go to justinmcroberts.com and message me if you want some follow-up, like, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting some projects. I, too, am a mom of littles, and I want to figure out how to do a project. Can you get into the nitty-gritty with me?" This is what I do now, is I help you live the life you're designed to live and become the person you're supposed to be as you do so. So you can go to justinmcroberts.com and book some time with me, and we can get into the actual weeds of these questions. In the meantime, between now and then, there will be another Q&R session next week. Jump to Instagram, send me a question, and let's see if it makes the podcast. Thanks for being on this road and this experiment with me. Until next time.